Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Okay, I have a couple of items for all of you at the top. As we mentioned, later today, in our guidance last night, I should say, later today, the President will sign an executive order to make sexual harassment an offense in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. This historic addition to the UCMJ honors the memory of Army Specialist Vanessa Guillen, whose experience with severe sexual harassment was followed by a brutal murder, catalyzing national attention to the scourge of sexual violence in our military and helping advance bipartisan military justice reform in the 2022 NDAA. This executive order also delivers on a key recommendation from the Independent Review Commission to strengthen the military justice response in prosecuting cases of domestic violence and fully implements changes to the UCMJ to criminalize the wrongful broadcast or distribution of intimate visual images. The Biden-Harris administration thanks Congress for its bipartisan commitment to pass monumental reforms to our military justice system and codify key recommendations from the IRC, the Independent Review Commission. We also look forward to continuing to work with Congress to support the safety and dignity of our service members. Also wanted to note that today we hit a major milestone in our global effort to be the arsenal of vaccines. 400 million doses shipped to 112 countries for free, with no strings attached. To put America's leadership into perspective, we have shipped 4 times more free doses to the world than any other country. And this is on top of our efforts to expand manufacturing at home and abroad, our close partnerships with manufacturers to provide their vaccines to hard-hit areas, and our work to turn vaccines into vaccinations around the globe. Last item for you. Today, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau launched a new initiative to save American families billions of dollars a year in unexpected and hidden fees charged by banks and financial companies. Right now, as I'm sure many of you know, banks and credit card companies lock you in with low rates only to charge you high fees after the fact. If you've ever used a credit card, which I'm sure everybody in this room has, you are familiar with this. You're familiar with all those extra fees, balance transfer fees, late fees, and more. They add up. Collectively, the CFPB estimates that these junk fees drain tens of billions of dollars per year from American families. Consumers are already starting to feel the benefits of the CFPB's work in this space. After the CFPB published a report on bank overdraft fees in December, many large banks, Bank of America, Capital One, and Wells Fargo, announced they would reduce or eliminate some of these fees. That's an important start, but not enough, which is why the CFPB is interested in hearing about everyday Americans' experiences with unexpected fees. This latest initiative by the CFPB was previewed at this week's Competition Council meeting, and it's just one of the ways we are, one of the steps we are taking to go after excessive fees that companies use to hide the true cost of products. From airline tickets to high-speed internet services, agencies are planning internet service fees, I should say. Agencies are planning actions over the coming months that will make prices clear up front so that consumers can save money by choosing the best deals for them. Let me say one other thing. I know there is a lot of news out there today, so let me reiterate something that you heard the President say, and I also said over Twitter. It's always been the decision of any Supreme Court justice, if and when they decide to retire, how they want to announce it, and that remains the case today. So we are not going to have additional details. You are always welcome to ask any questions you like at any time, and there's a lot of news out there, but I just wanted to say that at the top. Josh, go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. 2 subjects. So let's say hypothetically, a Supreme Court justice was to retire and announce it on his or her own terms. Does President Biden plan to honor his pledge to nominate a black woman to the court?
Well, I've commented on this previously. The President has stated and reiterated his commitment to nominating a black woman to the Supreme Court, and certainly stands by that. For today, again, I'm just not going to be able to say anything about any specifics until, of course, Justice Breyer makes any announcement, should he decide to make an announcement.
Okay, secondly, on Ukraine. Is the White House publicizing the troop buildups and the Russian disinfo efforts in hopes of deterring Moscow? And does the White House think that strategy is working? And are you prepared to release more details about what you say Russia's been doing?
Yes, on the last one, as we have it, and I think you have all experienced that in here, also at the State Department and Defense Department briefings, and certainly from briefings delivered by national security officials, senior national security officials as well. I will say, Josh, that we are much more cognizant of the Russian disinformation machine than we were in 2014. And many of you covered, of course, the invasion of Ukraine in 2014. And we have made a decision, a strategic decision, to call it disinformation when we see it. And all across the federal government, various agencies are working together to fight disinformation and correct it. In part, we know, that's because we know that Russia's disinformation operation is highly developed. We are more wiser. We are wiser. The world is wiser than they were in 2021, and Russia has a boundless capacity to misrepresent truth and what it's doing. And some of that tactic from their end is intended to set the predicate for them invading. And we need to be very clear with the global community and the U.S. public what they're trying to do and why. So there's a lot of efforts underway to do exactly that. In terms of whether it will have a deterrent effect, I think our biggest effort on that in that regard is laying out the clear potential consequences. But it is also important, and we think strategically important, to be very clear that what they're trying to convey publicly out there, a lot of that is misinformation, and people need to understand and digest that. Go ahead.
Jen, what preparations is the White House engaged in broadly in the case of a Supreme Court vacancy?
I'm just not going to detail any of that from here.
Not about unrelated to this. You can't detail what. Like, doesn't every White House like to get ahead of this in case of a sudden passing? In the case of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, none of that you can share.
I'm not going to detail internal planning from here. No.
Okay. Then let me ask you a couple other questions. Is there any scenario in which the president would select his Vice President Kamala Harris for the Supreme Court?
Again, I'm not going to speak to any considerations, preparations, lists, and as we've stated earlier, and you heard the president say, there's a long history of Supreme Court justices determining when they may retire, if they retire, and announcing that. And we're going to, that remains the case today.
Clearly, you're more wiser than to take those questions then. So I will ask you about a different topic, and that's Vladimir Putin, the president, saying yes, that he would very much consider personally sanctioning him in the case of a Russian invasion. Can you give us a sense, because Russia has dismissed or sort of poo-pooed that idea, what would sanctioning Vladimir
Does Russia
Putin...
have a role in determining our sanctions?
No, but they've said that it would have no impact. So what impact would sanctioning Vladimir Putin have on him, and what would that look like?
Well, I think what's important to note broadly is that what we've also said is that it will be far beyond, any sanctions package would be far beyond what was done in 2014. And that includes impacting business and economic interests of President Putin and the leadership of the Russian government. I would also note that while it has been our policy that we are not going to take options off the table from here, and we haven't, we also have been detailed what isn't in an initial package, and that doesn't mean that everything out there that's being talked about is in an initial package.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. When you were asked about the vice president possibly being selected as a Supreme Court nominee, you said you're not going to speak to any considerations. Does that mean she is being considered?
Again, Peter, I'm not going to speak to the reports of a Supreme Court justice retirement that hasn't been announced.
So theoretically, would someone who's
Theoretically, I do like that you preface it. I appreciate that.
Just wondering, hypothetically, theoretically, would someone who was an attorney general of a large state and who served with many key Senate votes be an attractive candidate to the president for an open Supreme Court seat?
I see what you did there, Peter. But the president has every intention, as he said before, of running for re-election, and for running for re-election with Vice President Harris on the ticket as his partner. But again, I will just reiterate that I have nothing more to offer in terms of specifics or information on the reports this morning.
Not enough.
Would you have another question for
yes.
me? Go ahead. I know there's other things on your mind, on your
Yes.
list over there.
Now that you guys have submitted the written responses to Russia's demands, they are saying, if we do not receive a constructive answer from the West on our security demands, Moscow will take appropriate measures. Is that a threat? Appropriate measures?
Well, let me first say that the aggressor here, as maybe you're echoing in some ways or raising, is Russia. Russia has tens of thousands of troops at the border. They have the ability also to make the decision to de-escalate, to bring troops back from the border, to participate in good faith in a diplomatic conversation, and that would certainly be our preference. So them making threats, I think Secretary Blinken had a very good quote, or it made me laugh, that he gave a couple of days ago where he said it was like the fox threatening to attack the hens in the hen house because they were feeling threatened by the hens. But our objective is to give them paths and to take part in a diplomatic conversation in good faith.
And as the Russians talk about appropriate measures, if one of those winds up being a Russian cyber attack, like DHS is warning about, would you guys consider that an act of war?
Well, Peter, we have talked many times before. First of all, there's no information we have at this point about any imminent threat against the U.S. homeland. We are always prepared for cyber threats from a range of sources, and we have a range of tools at our disposal to use in reaction, and the president reserves the right to do that, but I'm not going to get into a hypothetical.
And then on COVID origins, you guys are talking a lot about sanctions for Russia if they dare to invade Ukraine. What about sanctions for China at any point for misleading the world about the early days of the global pandemic?
We have used sanctions as a tool as it relates to our concerns about the behavior of a range of countries, including officials in China, but I have nothing to preview for you at this point.
Is it possible down the line, though, that sanctions would be considered some other form of punishment for their actions in the earliest days of the pandemic?
Well, you know, we strongly believe, and the president has been clear and directly clear about the importance of them being transparent and providing data and information related to the origins of the pandemic. But I don't have anything to predict for you in terms of additional actions.
So then my last one would be, the president said for months that he had not spoken directly to Xi about the COVID origins investigation. Now he says that he did talk to Xi about it, but nobody else was there. If the president had that conversation, did it work? And is Xi now playing ball?
What are you getting at there? Are you suggesting the president wasn't being honest about his own conversation with Xi?
No, but the story did change. For months, he was asked about it, and he said that he had not directly asked him about the COVID origins investigation.
We don't share every detail of every diplomatic conversation. You know that. The president answered a direct question just a week ago, or I think it was a week ago, yes, and provided that information.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. When was the last time the president talked to Justice Breyer? Have they had any communication today?
I don't have any more details of their communications.
I wonder if you can clear this up because there seems to be some disagreement among some legal scholars. Is it your understanding and the understanding of this administration that the vice president can be the tie-breaking vote to confirm a nominee to the court?
I would have to check on the specifics of that.
And just one more on the president's Supreme Court commission. I believe they finished their report. They turned it in last month. Has the president had a chance to review this? Might we hear from him on any decision or input that he's had?
He has received the report. I don't have any update on his analysis of it at this point in time. Go ahead.
Take you somewhere completely different.
Okay, let's go there.
The China bill.
Yes.
Which the president last night in a statement said he's heartened by the bipartisan work on the package, which it was in the Senate, not so much in the House. Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman McCall said it was absolutely not bipartisan, will likely garner no Republican support. Are you guys involved in, and if so, in getting this to a bipartisan package eventually? And what are your priorities in that 3,000-page bill, since it is pretty long? And is your timeline the State of the Union? What are you looking at here?
Well, I would say first that it did receive extensive bipartisan support in the Senate vote, right, in the Senate version. That our objective is, certainly remains, ensuring that this passes as soon as possible, and the president can sign it as soon as possible. I don't have a new deadline or timeline for you. We believe that bipartisan competitiveness legislation will help us tackle supply chain issues and inflation head on, and will make investments in American manufacturing and our economic strength so we can outcompete China. And we're certainly advocating that and have been advocating that and deeply involved in conversations with the House and Senate. And our objective is certainly that to have legislation passed that can take a range of steps, strengthening R&D, boosting manufacturing with important and imperative funding for chips, manufacturing chips, so we can make sure we bring down the cost of cars, as we know, which is leading to 1/3 of the inflationary pressure out there in the country. We want this legislation to help businesses and communities in every corner of the country outcompete their global competitors. In terms of specifics, as you noted, it's quite a long bill. We're certainly involved and engaged in it with officials from throughout the administration, but I'm not going to detail specifics of what we're for and against in it either.
Is there any possibility that should this play out, sort of similar to the infrastructure bill, take a long time, House Republicans will not get on board, that you, given the pressure of the chips shortage on inflation, that you just take out the strip out the chips portion, pass that individually, and then negotiate on the rest? Do you see that?
I'm not going to make a prediction of that at this point. I mean, as I understand it, the status of the legislative process is that both the House and the Senate have indicated that it will go to conference and they'll work out disagreements that they have over components of the legislation. Also, the Senate version had 68 votes, and certainly we believe that increasing and improving America's competitiveness and investing in R&D, research and development, and making sure we're more competitive in communities across the country is not a partisan idea. So we are hopeful about that process moving forward quickly, and the president would certainly like to sign it as soon as possible.
And then one more on this bill too, that is a difference between the House and the Senate version. The House version published last night had this outbound investment screening mechanism that wasn't part of the Senate bill. It would potentially block investments in countries like China. Does the White House support this provision, and will you fight that that's going to make it in the final package that's reaching the president's desk?
I'm not going to get into specifics of the bill. I would tell you that we are in daily contact from the White House with House and Senate leadership and committees, and we're discussing the path forward, but we're not going to negotiate the pieces from here.
Anything you can tell us on the work the executive branch is doing on exactly that same thing? Because Jake Sullivan has been talking about a potential mechanism like this being interesting to you guys and potentially working on this, but we haven't heard about it in a while.
I can see if there's any additional update from the National Security Team, of course, and certainly I know he's talked about that in the past, and it remains a priority. Go ahead.
I have to give it a shot myself as well.
Go ahead.
In this hypothetical alternative reality where a vacancy were to open up, could you say who within the White House would be sort of leading the charge on the selection vetting process?
As the president said, I'm sure that if and when there is an announcement by Justice Breyer, there will be more to be said. And we'll have more conversation in here. I'm sure he'll have more to say, but I'm not going to have anything more for you at this point.
Just switching gears on the energy front, the administration said on Tuesday it's in talks with major energy producing countries and companies around the world over a potential diversion of supplies to Europe if Russia invades Ukraine. Have any of the energy companies or countries contacted by the administration told you that they do indeed have an ability to divert extra supplies to Europe?
Well, that's been part of the conversation, but I don't have any announcements to make on their behalf. But certainly, that's been our objective, is to ensure that we are prepared for the possibility of the supply, the natural gas supply, which, as you know, is very much a regional issue, and there would be a big regional impact, less so here in the United States, as well as the global oil supply and ensuring there is enough supply on the market.
What do you see is the risk of the contingency planning failing to secure Europe's energy supply, since our reporting suggests so far that the industry has little or no capacity to do this?
There are no question there are logistical challenges of especially moving natural gas. We know that. That's part of our discussion with a lot of these companies and countries. But again, these conversations are ongoing and we don't intend to fail on them.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
A number of lawmakers sent a letter to the White House today, including Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren, asking the White House to release the memo that the Education Department put together looking at the president's legal authority to cancel student loan debt. I wonder, do you have a response to that, and why hasn't this memo been released?
Well, let me first say no one has paid or been required to pay a single dime of federal student loans since the president took office over a year ago. And I'll also add that our country is seeing one of the strongest economic recoveries in history, and the pause announced in December gives some breathing room for several more months to borrowers who are still coping with the pandemic. The Education Department will continue working to ensure a smooth transition to repayment. I would reiterate also that the President supports Congress, members of who sent the letter and others, sending him a bill that would provide $10,000 in debt relief, and he continues to look into what debt relief actions can be taken administratively. I'd also note that in terms of loans that have been forgiven since the president took office, beyond the pause on repayment, a total of $15 billion benefiting more than 675,000 student loan borrowers been part of the forgiveness. Borrower defense to repayment, $1.5 billion. Total and permanent disability repayments, loans forgiveness, I should say, $7.8 billion. ITT tech students, $1.3 billion. And public service loan forgiveness, $5 billion. So we have been doing a broad range of forgiveness and also have had this pause in place, meaning that no one who has student loans has been required to pay since the president took office.
But does the White House plan to release the memo? Like, does the White House plan to tell the public whether it thinks it has the authority to cancel $10,000?
Well, as I said, again,
debt
we're
on its
still
own?
looking at administrative options, but Congress can also send the president a bill that would provide $10,000 in debt relief, and he'd be happy to sign that bill.
On the trip on Friday to Pittsburgh, can you talk a little bit more about why the president is taking this trip? Is this about the president getting out more? I know that he talked about that last week, that he wanted to get out and, be face to face with people. Is that what this is about?
That's part of it. I think if the president could spend every day out on the road, he might do that. There are, of course, a lot of responsibilities as president that don't make that possible. So that is certainly part of that, and I expect you'll see him out on the road more in the coming weeks as well. It's also an opportunity for him to speak about his economic agenda and what steps he's taking to make people's lives better, to lower costs for Americans, to rebuild their communities, to make us more competitive, but certainly to interact with people in communities, those who disagree with him and those who agree with him as well.
And just quickly, on the executive order that's being signed later on today,
Yeah.
Is that order coming out because the NDAA did not do enough to address the issue of sexual harassment? Like, why is this order needed?
It was a key recommendation from the Independent Review Commission, so it's delivering on the Independent Review Commission's recommendation, which is something that was supported, these recommendations, and delivering on them by the leadership of the Department of Justice, so it's an effort to implement that. Go ahead.
I wanted to start with a question on behalf of a colleague
Sure.
on the radio network who wants to know if you have any update on the launch of Build Back Better World, which was supposed to, I guess, be implemented earlier this year. And would Dalip Singh's upcoming trip to Africa include scouting projects for Build Back Better World?
I'm happy to check with our national security team. We have talked about Build Back Better World and been working a lot behind the scenes on efforts to launch that around the world, and the president has talked about it on virtually all of his foreign trips to date, but I can get more specifics about Dalip's trip.
And on the meeting the president had today with the CEOs about Build Back Better is the strategy now with sort of the president talking about breaking it up in chunks potentially, is the plan to bring a new proposal to Democrats in Congress? What does that strategy look like as it relates to kind of the meeting that he had today? Is he trying to get a sense of what the priorities would be from these private sector CEOs?
The meeting was not a negotiation. It was not the basis of a negotiation. Those discussions will happen between the 50 members of the Senate who need to support a package, a big chunk, to move it forward. This was an opportunity to hear from business leaders, and I think you heard a number of them speak during the open press component of the meeting, and I know a number of them will be doing interviews, maybe with some of you afterwards as well. What I think was interesting and compelling to the president when we were talking about this last night was that they're all experiencing different challenges as they look ahead to their, many of them very successful businesses. Some of that is ensuring they can have enough women at a senior level in the workforce, and lowering the cost of childcare and making that affordable is a big issue that the CEO of Etsy has talked about, for example, quite a bit. The CEO of Cummins has talked a lot about climate change, or the climate agenda, and the importance of investing in that moving forward, because those are industries that will grow and have a huge opportunity for our manufacturing industries here in the United States. Those are all components that are part of the president's Build Back Better agenda, but he really wanted to hear from them on their industries, the best way to grow their businesses, the middle class, and how components will certainly impact them.
Is that a message the president plans to take to Democrats? Is he going to present something smaller, a big chunk, sort of a more narrow piece of legislation or proposal that perhaps can get unstuck in the Senate?
Well, again, I don't have any predictions of the legislative process. This was not a meeting about the legislative process. The president and senior members of our legislative team and senior White House officials are in constant contact with a range of senators, committee members, staffers, and really the point we're at now is determining what components there can be 50 votes for. And that will hopefully include a big chunk of what the president has proposed. But that's what the status of that is. But this was not a meeting to discuss legislative strategy or how to navigate conversations with different senators. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jen, I have a couple more on BBB. Ron Klain said last week that he'd like to see BBB legislation approved as quickly as possible. Some Democrats, Representative Jayapal, are saying that March 1st, the State of the Union, is kind of a deadline for action. Does the White House see it that way in terms of the time frame? Do you see the
No,
March
we've
1st
not
as
set a deadline. No.
And 5 Democratic senators wrote the president and the vice president urging them to keep the child tax credit expansion in BBB. But the president seemed pretty clear in the press conference he wasn't sure that that could happen. Is he reviewing that? Could he change his mind?
Well, the president proposed the child tax credit extension. He very much wants to see the child tax credit extended, and you've all heard him talk about how proud he is of the expanded child tax credit because of the impact it had on cutting childhood poverty by 40%, for giving people some extra breathing room. And there's some recent studies and evidence that the child tax credit helps working families in the developments and opportunities for all children. So he has long been an advocate. Again, this is the legislative process, right? And there needs to be 50 votes. We need every Democrat to support a package moving forward. I don't have anything to preview or predict for you on that front. That is going to be up to them to determine what that looks like.
One more. Should you have a Supreme Court nomination that has to make its way through the Senate, is there any concern that that could crowd out priorities like Build Back Better and make it that much harder to get something done here?
Not without getting into any specifics of what may be on the docket. We have to walk and chew gum at the same time here in the White House, and that includes navigating, the buildup of military troops on the border of Ukraine. That includes trying to get an omnibus bill passed and get our competition bill passed. That includes continuing to be the arsenal of vaccines to the world, and we are entirely capable of doing more than one thing at once. Go ahead in the back.
Thank you, Jen. I have 2 questions, 2 different topics.
Okay.
First one on Ukraine.
Is it about the Supreme Court?
No, actually,
Oh.
no. I'm not part of this this bunch. The president earlier this week said he talked to all NATO leaders. Canada has offered a $100 million loan to Ukraine and is considering, could be announced this afternoon, further support assistance. What type of contribution does the president think Canada could make to this crisis?
Well, we welcome the support of Canada and any country that is contributing to the needs of Ukraine, that is defending the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and defending what we feel is a fundamental value that we share with Canada and a number of countries around the world, which is the fact that no country should be able to invade and take the territory of another country. So we're not going to assess what they should do or not do. Every country has different capacities, capabilities, legal authorities. We recognize that, but we certainly welcome their support for Ukraine.
So the president hasn't asked for arms shipments or troop deployments?
I'm not going to get into any more details of conversations. We just recognize that every country has different capabilities, capacities, authorities, and a range of contributions, and doing it in a coordinated way we think is very effective.
I'd like to talk about, I have a question about Haiti.
Okay.
So Canada hosted an international meeting last week. Prime Minister Trudeau has called for immediate action to fix the security situation in Haiti. You know that in the next 2 weeks, it would have been the end of President Jovenel Moïse's term if he hadn't been assassinated. What's the U.S. plan, particularly in terms of security, knowing that there's no newly elected president to swear in on February 7th?
Well, let me first reference, and I think you're probably aware of this, but last week Deputy Secretary Wendy Sherman participated in a high-level ministerial hosted by Canada to discuss sustainable, inclusive solutions to the challenges faced by Haiti and Haitians. The ministerial was an opportunity for global leaders or high-level officials to reaffirm the continued international commitment to support Haiti as it confronts growing insecurity, works to restore its democratic institutions, and revives the country's economic development. We're also continue to work with Haitian authorities and international partners to provide additional assistance from the United States to the Haitian National Police to strengthen law enforcement, build up anti-gang operations, maintain peace and stability. And we have also, in response to heightened humanitarian needs in Haiti, USAID has provided more than $92 million in assistance in fiscal year 2021. So we're working on a range of channels, including in close coordination with other leaders about how we can help prop up humanitarian needs, address their security needs, and act in a coordinated way as Haiti looks to their future.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Just a quick question on inflation. Many people believe that government spending is a big factor in the current inflation levels. Can you speak to concerns that spending plans that come out of Build Back Better aren't paid for and so could mean higher deficits and more inflation in the future?
Aren't paid for? Build Back Better is paid for. Entirely.
Okay. Can you speak to the concerns that are coming in that it's
Who are
not
the concerns
actually
from, though? But who's saying it's not paid for? Because there have been a range of economists saying it's entirely paid for, and that has been a priority for the president. It has also been concluded by a number of Nobel laureates and experts from a range of economic experts on the outside that it will not contribute to inflation. So those are the global experts that we would point to, but there may be others suggesting something else, but I don't know who those people are.
if those bills do pass, it will not raise taxes?
Well, something being entirely paid for means that part of that is the highest income Americans, that companies would be asked to pay a little bit more. That has been part of the proposal and part of reforming the tax system to make it more fair.
So they're also not expected to contribute to future inflation then?
The Build Back Better bill, again, it's fully paid for. We would point to Nobel laureates and a range of global economists who have conveyed that it would not contribute to inflationary pressures. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. I wanted to ask about the impact that President Biden's experience in foreign policy has on his handling of the current situation with Russia and Ukraine. Obviously, he served on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He was vice president when Russia invaded Crimea. He oversaw the end of the war in Afghanistan last year. Can you just talk about how those various experiences have informed his decision-making and his thinking on the situation currently with Russia and Ukraine?
Absolutely. So one of the lessons learned I talked about a little bit earlier in response to Josh's question, which is the ability and the boundless capacity of Russia to misrepresent the truth and spread misinformation through a range of channels. I mean, they have a range of state-run media channels that are not just prevalent in Russia, but around Eastern Europe, across Europe. You can even find them in the United States. But even beyond that, this is a capacity that we've seen them utilize in 2014 and 2016 and many times in between. So one of the lessons that we have learned is certainly, and the president has learned, is certainly that it's important to call out this disinformation and to make clear to the American public, to the global community, what they're trying to do here and the fact that it is not accurate. They're trying to set the predicate for war. We've done that through a number of means. Last week, the administration announced sanctions on 4, of course, Ukrainian individuals. We also had a briefing, launched a website, released a fact sheet to educate the public on the Russia disinformation ecosystem. The FBI and DHS are coordinated with the intelligence community as well as state and local partners to ensure a common understanding of Russia disinformation and influence activities related to the situation, in Ukraine. So that's one part. I'd also say that for the president, and this has been a priority for him since he came into office, building up our alliances and partnerships with the global community, ensuring that close coordination is front and center and is a priority, is something that he has learned through his time in foreign policy as the former chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, of course, as vice president, is imperative. And we believe that's proving to be very effective at this point in time. We've had more than 100, probably way more than that at this point, engagements with NATO partners, allies around the world, and we have a coordinated and strong approach to how we're approaching the buildup of troops on the border of Ukraine. So there are many lessons, but I would say those are two of the biggest ones.
Right, and can I also ask about the China competitiveness bill
Sure.
that was mentioned earlier? Does the White House want to see Congress finish work on that before Build Back Better? Is there like a priority there in terms of getting that done?
The president would like to sign it as soon as possible, but beyond that, I'm not going to get into an order of events. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. I have a few questions. The first on the Supreme Court.
Sure.
Does the president believe that the current makeup of the court accurately reflects America's demographics?
Well, I would say the president, as you know, asked for put together a commission that could review, that is a commission made of Democrats and Republicans of a range of legal views that could take a look at everything from the makeup of the court to how they select cases to the length of service to the size of the court. That's a report, as Mary asked about earlier, that he certainly has. I don't have an update on his review of that at this point in time. I will note, though, for you to go directly to your question, he has nominated a historic number of judges who are people of color, a historic, I don't know if it's a historic number of women, but a majority of the judges he has nominated are women. That speaks to his desire and his interest in having courts around the country that look like America and that represent the experiences of America, including public defenders and others. So that is the evidence of his commitment to that I would point to.
Is it the expectation of the president and the White House that whomever he would nominate for any hypothetical vacancy, that would be an appointment that Democrats could unify behind?
Well, that's always the hope. If that opportunity presents itself. Go ahead in the back.
Thanks, John. The pace of Americans who are getting booster shots has dropped by more than 50% since December, and public health experts are saying that one cause that might be behind that is confusion over the CDC's distinction between being fully vaccinated and being up to date on vaccinations. Folks with whom I've spoken say that initially describing the 2-dose regimen for mRNA vaccines may have been premature. Given what we now know about variants and breakthrough cases, was it a mistake to say that people were fully vaccinated back last year before we knew what the virus is going to do next?
Well, it was not a decision made by the White House. It was a decision made by our public health experts at the CDC who make those definitions or determine those definitions. They've also said that the term fully vaccinated refers to your primary series. So that means being up to date on your vaccines, which is true if you have kids. I have kids, making sure they're up to date. When they go to the doctor, you ask them if they need any shots. That is true of when you need a booster shot. You need it a set number of months, depending on what vaccine you got, past your second dose. That's something we think American people are more than capable of keeping up to date on. It is also true that we think more people need to get boosters, that boosters are very effective in protecting against serious illness, hospitalization, and that is one of the most effective steps that can be taken. 70% of eligible seniors have gotten their boosters, but certainly it needs to be higher in other age groups.
I do have one on the news today. I'm sorry, you gotta
Go.
try.
Don't need to be sorry. It's okay. You're doing your job.
So, if Justice Breyer were to retire, one of the last cases that he'll face as a member of the Supreme Court obviously will be Dobbs versus Jackson, which court watchers are saying is likely to weaken or potentially overturn Roe v. Wade. If his potentially final opinion ends up being a dissent in the Dobbs case, what is the administration's plan to protect abortion access as best it can beyond trying to pass a congressional remedy, which I think, unless you guys have 10 extra senators lying around, might not be able to beat a filibuster?
Well, without speaking to the future of the Supreme Court, what I will reiterate is that the president has been an advocate for codifying Roe. That's something he certainly thinks and hopes that Congress will act on. We've also taken steps and have announced steps in recent days even for HHS to amp up their support for providers across the country. And that's something we will continue to look for ways to do, but I'm not going to make a prediction of the outcome. Thanks, everyone.
German Chancellor timing, do you guys have that?
Not yet. Hopefully we'll have it soon.
Thank you, Jen.
Any response to the Fed signaling it will raise rates in mid-March?
I would just say that the president, obviously the Fed is independent, and we stand by that, as does the president, that the Chairman Powell has indicated his plans to recalibrate in the past, and the president spoke last week to his support for that. Thank you, everyone. Happy Monday. Okay. This afternoon, the President will meet with the White House Competition Council to discuss its success thus far in providing concrete cost savings for American families and to discuss plans for further actions in the weeks, months, and years ahead. The Competition Council was set up by the President's July Competition Executive Order to coordinate and monitor progress across the entire federal government. It is comprised of 10 cabinet members and the heads of 7 independent agencies. He'll note today that the lack of competition costs average American households about $5,000 a year, which is a pretty significant sum when you think about people's budgets. Since the executive order was signed 6 months ago, the council's members have met every deadline in the president's order. These actions across a broad range of industries will bring real benefits to American families. For example, the FDA has taken action to lower the cost of hearing aids from thousands to hundreds of dollars for the millions of Americans suffering from hearing loss. It's becoming cheaper and easier for Americans to fix the things they already own. Following the executive order's support for the right to repair, the FTC will ramp up enforcement actions against illegal repair restrictions. Since then, big firms like Apple and Microsoft voluntarily announced changes to their policies so that consumers can readily repair their own phones and laptops. The Department of Justice, the FTC, and other agencies have increased efforts to challenge or block mergers that would leave customers with fewer choices, higher prices, and lower wages. For example, the Department of Justice blocked an insurance mega merger that would have raised insurance costs for consumers and businesses alike. So this is part of our ongoing effort. I also wanted to share that NATO is launching a significant military training exercise called Neptune Strike 22. This is something my colleague at the Department of Defense updated on Friday, but it will run through February 4th and is designed to demonstrate NATO's high-end maritime strike capabilities. The USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group will serve as the centerpiece for this military exercise and be placed under NATO operational control. This is the first time since the end of the Cold War that a U.S. Carrier Strike Group has gone under NATO command. And this exercise will help demonstrate the unity, capability, and strength of the transatlantic alliance. It also advances our ability to integrate an aircraft carrier strike group into NATO's deterrence and defense efforts. While planning for Neptune Strike began in 2020, long before the current escalation of tensions from Russia's aggressive posture towards Ukraine, such exercises help the United States and its allies enhance interoperability and ensure readiness for any threat against NATO. Josh, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Jen. 2 subject areas.
Yep.
First, Ukraine and Russia. The president is going to have his meeting with European counterparts. What does he plan to discuss with them, and how does he plan to address the issue of natural gas, given that 40% of EU's natural gas imports come from Russia?
Sure. Well, as we put out just a little bit earlier today in guidance, the President will hold a secure video call with European leaders as part of our close consultation and coordination with our transatlantic allies and partners in response to our shared concerns over Russia's military buildup on Ukraine's borders. During that conversation, we expect they will discuss diplomacy, deterrence, and defense efforts, and we'll have a readout for you all afterwards. And certainly, a discussion about the pending sanctions or discussion of that, we would expect to be part of that as well. But in terms of the impact, I don't have anything more to read out for you on that front.
And then secondly, per the Supreme Court, should race be a factor in college admissions?
Well, this is, I think, in relation, I would expect, to the announcement by the Supreme Court about the decision to take up the affirmative action case this morning. While we're not going to comment on the litigation or for those questions, of course, the Department of Justice, we strongly believe this administration in the benefits of diversity in higher education, and we take very seriously our commitment to advancing equity and equal opportunity for historically underserved populations. That's why on day one, the President signed an executive order launching an ambitious whole-of-government response to center equity throughout the government's work. Throughout the Department of Education, the administration has provided historic investments and support for historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges and universities, and minority-serving institutions, such as Hispanic-serving institutions, including nearly $21 billion in cumulative support. And we have moved swiftly to protect student civil rights and equal opportunity, including by issuing guidance about schools' obligations to investigate and address claims of discrimination and harassment. So, of course, the Department of Justice, they can speak to their view on the litigation. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Has President Biden made a final decision about deploying more troops to Eastern Europe?
Well, let me give you a brief update, and I know that my colleague, John Kirby, is going to be briefing shortly in about 45 minutes or so at the Defense Department. We have been consulting with allies in deployments and refining plans for all scenarios. We've always said we would reinforce our allies on the eastern flank, and those conversations and discussions have certainly been part of what our national security officials have been discussing with their counterparts now for several weeks. In fact, we've never ruled out the option of providing additional assistance in advance of an invasion. Those discussions have been ongoing with our partners and Eastern Flank countries. And again, I would expect that my colleague John Kirby would have more of an update on where the process is at this point in time.
So John Kirby will make an announcement about whether or not he's made a decision?
No, I think he will provide an update on where things stand on those discussions.
Okay. So last week, President Biden at the press conference said that the U.S. would fortify NATO allies, but said it was dependent on an invasion, saying that if he would send more troops to Poland, Romania, if Putin did invade Ukraine. So the fact that he's considering this now and having these discussions with Pentagon leaders over the weekend, does that suggest that he believes an invasion is imminent?
We've never actually ruled out providing additional support, assistance to Eastern Flank countries in advance of any invasion. And those discussions with them have been ongoing, and certainly that's been part of our contingency planning.
I guess the question is, it does appear to be a shift in his thinking and his attitude toward it. Is that how you would characterize it?
I wouldn't characterize it that way. We have spoken to the fact that, and we've put out a lot of information about our view of the preparations being made by President Putin and the Russians. While we can't get into the mind of President Putin, we are seeing the preparations that they're making at the border. We have been very clear, and the President has been direct, that military action by Russia could come at any time. He said that last week as well. So we have been in conversations and discussions with Eastern Flank countries. Obviously, our Secretary of State just returned from a trip to Europe as well, and he was part of the discussions this weekend too. And part of that has been contingency planning and discussing what their needs have been.
My last question is, today the President has this call with European leaders. Several of them are on this: UK, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, NATO, the European Council. Why is Ukraine not on that call this afternoon?
Well, we have a range of conversations with Ukrainians. Obviously, our Secretary of State met with them last week, and they will be a part of many conversations moving forward. As I noted a little bit earlier, part of this is a discussion about deterrence and defense efforts, diplomacy, but certainly they will be a part of many conversations, as they have been from the beginning. Go ahead.
So what happened then in the last few days that prompted the Pentagon to present specific potential troop deployments to the President? Or put another way, why now?
Well, I wouldn't say we're characterizing it exactly that way. The President has said last week, and we also said that as we've been watching the preparations of President Putin and the Russians, that they were prepared at any moment to take military action. We've also been in ongoing discussions from our Secretary of State to members of our national security team with our Eastern Flank partners about what their needs are and what security concerns they have. So I wouldn't say it's a response to an abrupt moment. It's a part of an ongoing contingency planning process and discussion.
After this weekend, is he more or less concerned about the possibility of a Russian invasion of Ukraine?
Well, he said last week that military action by Russia could come at any time. That remains his point of view.
And there's been clamoring in this town and over in Ukraine for a U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Where do things stand on appointing somebody?
Certainly understand that. I don't have any update on the status at this point in time.
The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry said the decision to draw down the U.S. presence in Kyiv at the embassy was, quote, premature and a manifestation of excess caution. Is this potentially the afterglow of what happened in Afghanistan, concern for that, or is something else more specific prompting people to leave?
Well, I would say that our State Department regularly reviews and assesses what steps need to be taken for the security of our personnel. I would note that the travel advisory was already at a level 4 since back in October. We've also been closely consulting and keeping Ukrainians abreast. I would say this is more akin to the steps we took in Ethiopia and Kazakhstan than any other country or conflict.
One more on Ukraine and then one other quick subject. The House Speaker today has requested a bipartisan all-members briefing on the situation in Ukraine of the White House. Is that something you guys plan to fulfill?
We have been in close consultation with members and leadership from the beginning. I don't have any update on this specifically, but that's been our objective and how we have proceeded. So I'm sure we are working to meet the requests and needs of members.
And based on some news reports, it looks as if at least Jake Sullivan, maybe others, are talking to senior lawmakers about this on a fairly
And we
regular
have been
basis.
for weeks. Mm-hmm.
On another subject, another violent weekend across the country. There was the shooting in New York. There was a shooting here in D.C. of a police officer. There have been reports of a possible executive actions that the president might be able to take in the realm of police reform or police policy. Where do things stand on that? And when should be coming soon?
May I address this weekend first, and I will come around to your question, but I think you had a few in there, important ones to address. The events of this weekend are a reminder that law enforcement officers head into harm's way every single day. They and their families make an extraordinary sacrifice for their communities. The president is never going to be satisfied or complacent when officers are being gunned down, or when Americans have to worry about whether they can safely ride the subway or bus or even be at work. We've seen a surge in crime. Obviously, this weekend is a glaring example of that, especially gun violence over the last 2 years, and the president has been aggressive in using the tools at our disposal to combat that. That's why he took early action on gun violence last spring, and it's why he rolled out a comprehensive plan to combat crime last summer. He also believes, as many Americans do, that we can and must have a criminal justice system that both protects public safety and upholds our founding ideals of equal treatment under law. That's why he not only has implemented this comprehensive plan to combat crime, but why he is continuing to advocate for reforms to our policing system. He thinks that we can do both, but I don't have an update on any timings for next step on that. Go ahead.
Thanks. First, on the markets, does the president think it's a big deal that today the Dow Jones is down at one point more than 1,100 points?
Well, to start with, we focus on the trends in the economy, not any one day and any single indicator. Unlike his predecessor, the president does not look at the stock market as a means by which to judge the economy. I would note that the market is up around 15% compared to when President Biden took office. But our measure of success is really how real working families are doing, whether they have a little breathing room, whether they have a job that delivers some dignity and a paycheck that they can support a family on. And we've seen a great deal of progress made on that front.
Thank you. On schools in Virginia, 7 districts representing 350,000 students are suing the state. They're hoping to get a strict mask mandate for students that has been rolled back by the new governor reinstated. So who does the president think knows best for students? School board members or parents?
Well, the president believes that public health officials have the best guidance on what we can all do to protect ourselves, including teachers, administrators, and students. It's always been up to local school districts to determine how they're going to approach what implementation measures they are going to put in place. But here's what we know from public health officials, who are the experts on a pandemic. Studies show that masks reduce transmissions in school. They are a proven tool that helps keep students and teachers safe from COVID, and they can thus help keep schools open and safe. In short, we know it works, and we need every leader to focus on using the tactics we know work to keep our students safe and our schools open. I know you mentioned Virginia, but in Texas, the state is fighting a critical public health measure to protect our children and keep our schools safely open for Head Start communities. Ones that a provision that is requiring masks to keep students and keep communities safe. They're fighting against that. Why is that? I think that has more to do with politics than it does with public health.
But right now in Virginia, the law is, now that there's a new governor, but students should not have to wear masks if their parents say that they don't think they need to wear masks. So if a parent wants to send their kid to school with no mask, should that child be allowed to go to school and be in class?
Again, what we're advising school districts on is to abide by public health guidelines and follow public health guidelines. And it's about keeping an entire community safe. And those are the decisions that are being, that people should focus on making.
Just so that it's crystal clear for anybody watching, you guys think that ultimately in this conflict between school board members and parents, the school board members should have more of a say in what
It's
a
actually
child.
not what I said. I think everybody should abide by public health guidelines, not just to keep their own kids safe, but keep their school community safe, whether it's teachers, classmates, administrators, others in schools.
Okay, on crime, to follow up on what Ed was asking about, would you agree that the most important job for any president is to keep Americans safe?
I would agree.
So you said that the president's never satisfied if people don't feel safe. Does he know that after a year in office, people do not feel safe in this country?
Well, Peter, I think if we look at the facts here, we've seen a surge of crime over the last 2 years. Would you agree with that?
So what are you attributing the rise in crime to then?
Well, I think we should be responsible in how we're reporting to the public what the roles are, what the reasons for the surge in crime. Gun violence is a huge reason for the surge in crime. Underfunding of some police departments and their need for additional resources, something the president has advocated for consistently through the course of his career. That's something we know we need to take action on. And it is absolutely true that he will not be satisfied or complacent when officers are being gunned down or when Americans have to worry about whether they can safely ride the subway or bus. That should not be a political issue. He's somebody who has had a long career of many decades of fighting for funding for police departments, for local communities in order to reduce crime.
But he's been here in office for more than a year, and the murder rate is nearing a 25-year high. So why don't we see and hear more from the president about this? We hear all the time about things that you guys are doing to fight the pandemic because that is a risk to American people. A rising murder rate is a risk to American people too, right?
And he has spoken to crime. But I think what people are most focused on, as they should be, are what actions he has taken. He has unveiled a strategy to focus federal law enforcement resources on combating violent crime, offered unprecedented levels of funding through the rescue plan for cities and states to put more cops on the beat and invest in proven community anti-violence programs, something every Republican voted against. The Department of Justice has announced $139 million in grants to cities for community policing, which will put 1,000 more officers on the streets. He's also proposed doubling those grants, and he's called for an additional $750 million for federal law enforcement. He's announced a zero-tolerance policy for gun dealers who willfully sell illegal guns, and we've launched gun trafficking strike forces in New York and cities across the country. Actions are important here, and he has a long record of them.
But does the president think that any of that is working?
The president thinks you should have a plan to address crime and gun violence. He has one, and we look forward to working with people who support that effort.
But as the murder rate nears a 25-year high, would he consider maybe trying something different?
Trying something other than supporting a massive plus-up in funding from his predecessor, cracking down on gun trafficking and gun violence, which is a major driver of the violence we've seen across the country, working to support community policing programs and police departments across the country. I think most people who want to fight crime would agree that's the right approach. Go ahead. Go ahead, Justin.
Thanks, Jen. I know Kirby's briefing later, but
Sure.
just to put a finer point
Yeah.
on it, do you have any information about how many troops are under consideration, what the time frame for the president's decision are, the sort of the logistical details of a possible deployment?
I don't have any more details from here other than to convey that we're in close consultation with Eastern Flank countries about their security needs. And again, we've always said we would support them. We've never said that an invasion would be a prerequisite for that.
Do you expect the written response that you're putting together to include any requests or demands from the U.S. side, including a time frame for President Putin to start drawing down troops from Ukraine's border?
I don't have anything to preview in terms of what a written proposal would be. I would just note, because we've talked about this a bit, that written proposals have been the basis of basically every agreement we've ever had with the Russians and many countries around the world. They're a standard part of diplomacy, and they're a format for providing conveying areas where you have concern, and also outlining areas where you can work together. But I don't have anything to preview on what that would look like.
we didn't have a chance last week to talk about one part of the president's press conference where he said he'd like to be in a position to lift, to say that China is meeting its commitments and therefore be able to lift some of the tariffs. I'm wondering, when he said that, did he mean making good on the phase one commitments that have already been out there? I know China's not meeting those, or does he mean additional commitments that you'd be asking for from China?
I think he meant he's looking forward to getting some recommendations through the review process that's ongoing.
And then one last one, there was an FBI raid last week on Representative Cuellar, reportedly over his ties to Azerbaijani oil executives. I know you're not going to comment on an ongoing investigation, but do you think that the congressman should step away from his committee assignments or congressional work while this investigation is on?
I'm just not going to have any comment on this at this point. Go ahead.
A couple more on Ukraine, Jen. There's a proposal that's floating in the Duma that would ask Vladimir Putin to recognize the Donetsk and